Please join me in welcoming Congressman Jim Clyburn, who is the Majority Whip and the third-ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives. He currently serves as the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis. He is also the chairman of the Rural Broadband Task Force and Democratic Faith Working Group. When he came to Congress in 1993 to represent South Carolina's 6th Congressional District, he was quickly elected as the co-president of the freshman class, and he has risen through the leadership ranks ever since. He was subsequently elected chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, elected chairman and vice chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. He previously served as Majority Whip from 2007 to 2011 and served as Assistant Democratic Leader from 2011 to 2019. As a national leader, he has championed rural and economic development, and many of the initiatives have become law. His 10-20-30 federal funding formula was included in the fourth section of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Congressman Clyburn is also a passionate supporter of historic preservation and restoration programs. So I want to thank Congressman Clyburn, Jim, for joining us today. He's going to be interviewed by our Chief Advocate and General Counsel, Angie Cronenberg, who served under his daughter at the FCC for a number of years. He's a good friend, he's a great champion, and he's someone that will lead and help the institutions of the House and the Senate as they make policy for years to come. And so we welcome Jim, we thank him for coming, and we look forward to the interview and the vision that he will set for broadband and many other initiatives that are important to all of us. So thank you very much for coming, and we welcome Jim Clyburn.
Welcome, Congressman. We're so happy to have you with us today. I know you have many issues on your plate, but we'd like to focus on broadband, and thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Share with us the reasons for your formation of the Rural Broadband Task Force and how the task force conducted its work that has led to the introduction and passage of the Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act in the House.
Well, as you probably know, when I wrote my memoirs, I called the book Blessed Experiences. And there are two big things about the title of that book that I think comes into play with this and almost everything that I do. And that is simply this. I had a professor in my second year of college with whom I often sort of argued. And one day he stopped the class and he said to me, "Now, young man, let me tell you something. You'll never be in a more, nor will you ever be in a less than what your experiences allow you to be." Now, I took that to heart, and I thought about that a lot throughout my life, ever since that day in that classroom. And throughout my life, I've looked at these experiences and how they shape people. And then all of a sudden, this thing happened. I was here operating, running a state agency, and then serving in Congress. And one day I got a call from the accountant of the Williams sisters, the two, Venus and Serena. And it was during the time they were having this boycott was taking place in South Carolina because of the Confederate battle flag. And the Family Circle Cup was being played. It just moved from Hilton Head to Charleston. And so Larry Bailey, his name, said to me, he said, "Serena has to play this tournament down in Charleston, and she's got these conflicts because of this boycott. Do you think there's anything that we could work out to mitigate her playing in this tournament and not be embarrassed because of the boycott?" And after some going back and forth, we worked out a way for her to come to South Carolina and to mitigate that. And one of the things was that she would provide the students of Clarendon School District number 1 some laptops. I've been trying to get laptops, as you know, you may know, I give out laptops to high school graduates every year, 175 we did this year. And so she agreed to do that and to bring 100 of those students down to Charleston to see a professional tennis match. When I told the superintendent of the school what I had done, I was feeling so proud of myself. The superintendent looked at me with sort of an empty look, and I was puzzled by it. Then she asked me, and what do you think they're going to be able to do with those laptops? I said, well, you put them in the library. Let them check the laptops out just like they check out books. And she said to me, and then what do they do when they get home? These kids are not connected to the internet. The laptop is going to do them absolutely no good. Around 34% of the households in that school district had internet capacity. That opened my eyes. And that has been instructive to me ever since. And I thought about that little book that I keep here in the office that's called The Next Greatest Thing. And it's about the 50th anniversary of rural electrification and what rural electrification did to rural America. And the book gets its title from a testimony given in a Tennessee church, a rural church in Tennessee, when a farmer stood up one night and said, brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. The greatest thing on earth is to have the love of God in your heart. And the next greatest thing is to have electricity in your house. That, to me, is what expressed the value of rural electrification back in the 20th century. And to me today, the next greatest thing is to have the internet in every home. That's what's going to get healthcare to rural communities. That's what will get online learning to those rural children who are not connected to the rest of the world. The kind of thing that's been revealed, maybe unveiled to us today because of COVID-19. Healthcare. Without the broadband, we cannot have telehealth. Without the broadband, we cannot have online learning. We have kids now who are under threat of losing the second year of school because they cannot go to school in person. And the ones who've got broadband will be able to continue to get education online. But if you aren't connected, you aren't going to get educated. And then what will happen to 8th, 9th, 10th graders who lose 2 consecutive years of school? They'll be going back to the 9th grade, as many of them as 16 and 17-year-olds. They'll never graduate from college, high school. At least more go off and get a post-secondary education. So broadband, to me, is what is needed in the 21st century. And that's what got me so involved in this. And I've been involved in it ever since. And then a year ago, I formed the Rural Broadband Task Force, where I brought bipartisan views to the table to see what we could do about getting broadband classified, at least in the minds of people, as an infrastructure issue that should be in any infrastructure plan going forward. And that's what we've been able to do so far. And when we went to the White House to talk about infrastructure, Nancy Pelosi allowed me to lead the discussion. And I took up with President Trump why I thought any infrastructure bill needed to have at its core broadband. We call the internet the information highway. So let's treat it like we treat the interstate highways, a necessary entity in order to get us to where we need to be.
Your plan for that investment in the infrastructure, and it also calls for an investment in the people so they can afford to purchase the services that come over that infrastructure, their broadband internet access service, high-speed internet access service in their homes. Tell us a little bit more about what those investments look like and how the plan works together to meet America's needs today.
Well, if you take a look at what it takes to really have, I want to say, efficient, effective broadband, it's got to be accessible and affordable. Now, there's no need to have access if you don't have affordability. So my idea is that this expenditure that we're talking about, upwards of maybe around $100 billion. That's what the Senate talked about. We started out talking around $85 billion in my talks with senators. We have come to the conclusion that maybe it will be $100 billion bill, but to make sure that we make it affordable, we have to put the money's there for communities, for people to be able to afford it. We got to subsidize stuff, just like we did for rural electrification. We wouldn't have done that with Tennessee Valley without the Tennessee Valley Authority and these other entities that we put in place, the co-ops. The co-ops, they've already got access. I mean, the right-of-ways are there. All we need to do is sort of broaden their thinking a bit to get beyond electrifications. They can do for broadband in the 21st century what they did for electricity in the 20th century. And a lot of co-ops are now coming around that way of thinking. They're very comfortable with electricity and leaving it up to somebody else to do the broadband. I think they now see the critical role they can play in this. So my plan is to say to the co-ops, and most, I think 40 some odd states, all 50 states don't have rural electric co-ops, so most of them have. But that's one way it seemed to me to get broadband, the fiber that is necessary to run the broadband, to make it efficient and effective. There's no need to have the broadband if you got to have a home sitting there and the students doing their homework and the parents won't have access while the students are doing their homework and vice versa. We need to have sufficient capacity so that you can have a home to function in rural communities like they function downtown Washington, D.C.
INCOMPAS members agree with you wholeheartedly on that. We have a number of fiber providers, and they're stringing fiber to provide the middle mile as well as the last mile connections to consumers and businesses. The needs are significant, and certainly, as you recognize, the need in rural America has not been fully met. There is a huge gap that has happened, a schism that we've got to address. And you just mentioned, the ongoing conversations among the leaders of the Senate and the House, including yourself, obviously, as leading on this issue. What's the likelihood this could get addressed this year? And if it isn't addressed this year, will it be a top priority next year?
It will absolutely be a top priority next year. No matter what we might do this year, it will not be sufficient. Anything that we do this year will be somewhat of a stopgap or to fill in. It'll be small bore, nothing like we need. So it is absolutely going to be a top priority next year. I think this has sufficient bipartisan support for us to move forward on this. COVID-19 has been an eye-opener to everybody. I think all of us knew that there were problems with our healthcare delivery system, but nobody really focused on how significant this problem was. And then just to think about children may have it to lose a second year of school, unheard of. Through no fault of their own. This ain't like dropping out. This is being pushed out of the educational process because your government has not done the things that it needs to do in order to protect you going forward. So this health care issue has got to be solved. And to me, that's got to be priority. How we get beyond this pandemic has got to be priority. But we can't sustain it without broadband. Because if you get beyond it, we had all the testing in the world, free to everybody. It would be no good, or it would have limited goodness if we don't have the ability to trace the contacts. And I don't think you can effectively trace the contacts without broadband. It's just there. And we got to recognize that and do what is necessary to make it efficient.
The work that you've been doing to lay the foundation for better access is just, it's prescient. You know, you had started doing this work well before COVID hit our shores. So we really appreciate the attention, the dedication that you personally have made on this issue. There's so much more to be done. The needs at home, all the services that are being delivered at home now through broadband really require greater capacity, fiber connections. Talk a little bit about your recognition of that need for a very robust connection at home so all the services can be delivered to all of the members of a household, whether it's the educational needs, the telemedicine needs. You've prioritized the need for fiber connection, and there have been some large companies who've come out against that most recently, which is disturbing to INCOMPAS and its members, because we really think you got to have more fiber in the ground. If we're going to be building, investing in broadband infrastructure, it needs to be robust and meet the needs today and the needs tomorrow. So talk a little bit about your priority on that issue.
Well, I think that what we've got to do is really think about this stuff holistically and just think about our own homes and how we operate efficiently in our own homes. And there are little things like one dig. This whole thing of a lot of us believe very strongly in doing what is necessary to get low cost, affordable energy to people. And then I've seen these rules that we've got that if you dig a trench or ditch or whatever to lay pipes for to get energy into areas, and we got a rule said nothing else can go in that ditch. Why?
Right.
That doesn't make sense. Why can't you have fiber running in the same ditch? And so Anna Eshoo, I applaud her and the work she's done on this. And we brought her legislation into ours to make it more holistic. Ms. Main, Grace Ming up in New York, the work she's done on hotspots in rural communities, in the community. In fact, I'm told that in New York City, 25% of the students in New York City are without broadband. And so if you think about life in our own families, in our own communities, I think that the big guys need to think seriously about this. We're already saying that so many of the people who are home, working from home, will never go back to an office. A lot of the companies to see that they can be much more efficient with people if they allow them to work from home. Who will be allowed to work from home? The people who are connected to the rest of the world through broadband. So we have got to look at this, to me, a little more realistically. And you can look at some of the businesses. There are businesses located in rural areas. I'm thinking now of a business down in Charleston County, out in the little area of Ravenel, the guy, in order for his business to function, he needed to have the ability to fulfill orders in time. He didn't keep inventory all over his lot. He sold these small tractors, I call them small tractors, these four-wheelers and three-wheelers that do certain farm work. But in order for him to compete, he had to be able to take the orders and fill them online rather than store all this stuff in his lot. And then the internet stopped. Yeah. The ability to have the internet was about 1 mile from his business. And he came to me and says, I need help. Well, he doesn't want to move his business to downtown Charleston. He wants to stay in that rural community, provide jobs for people in that community, and stay near his home. So why not run the internet to him rather than forcing him to go downtown Charleston 25, 30 miles away in order to function in his business? So I think that the big guys need to really take a serious look at what will benefit the economy going forward and how we can make this country help fill out its motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. How do we do that? There are various ways to do that, not just in education, not just in energy production, not just in healthcare, but we do that in economic interest as well, the businesses that we operate, and everybody ought to have a fair chance at operating an efficient business.
We agree. And the experience of our members, what they're finding is that small companies who are typically, based in the hometown, who are meeting the needs of consumers and the small businesses in that town. And they need to be able to string the fiber along, get access, to the poles, get access to the conduit. It requires working with the municipalities to receive the right authorizations to be able to build, so you can work along the roads and the sidewalks to access the poles. It requires working with the pole owners, the utility owners, and then of course the small businesses in that town. And we have quite a few fiber provider members who've been very successful with that model. And we appreciate the leadership of you and Congresswoman Eshoo in recognizing how dig once is really important. When you're digging up the street one time, laying that conduit that allows then for a fiber provider to just string the fiber through it is a heck of a lot cheaper than having to tear up the roads again just to lay the conduit so you can put the fiber through it. So that is a key part of your legislation, and we really appreciate that. And we encourage more work by Congress to look what else can we do to streamline processes, educate the localities of the benefits of streamlining those processes and making sure that they recognize how good local policy can also lead to better broadband deployment. So thank you for that. So I don't want to.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to just get, any further perspective you have on what our competitive providers can do to encourage more partnership with government in terms of education, in terms of passing the right policies. So we'd like to get your advice. Tell us, what do we need to do a better job at so that we can inform and educate policymakers?
Well, I think one of the things, and I run the risk here of, Reverend, there's one thing to be said about being as far north of the promise as I am. You tend to not worry about the consequences so much of what you might say, so I'm going to say something here that may be disconcerting to some people, but I think that we got to look at our policies. And one policy that bothers me a great deal is this whole notion that if you have, if the internet is available to say one home in a census tract, is considered to be covered. Now, come on. I'm in rural South Carolina. My good friend Chip knows a lot about rural Mississippi. And if you got the big house with the internet and all the little houses around it, places that used to be plantations and farms, and you've got low to moderate income people living around in that same census tract. And if the big house has got the internet, that census tract will be considered to be covered. I don't think so. That kind of policy we need to take a look at and make sure. That's why I've been pushing so hard for my 10, 20, 30 plan in these communities. That is to say, when the Census Bureau tells us that any community, census tract if you please, where 10% or more of the population, 20% or more of the population has been stuck beneath the poverty level for the last 30 years. That's a persistent poverty community, irrespective of how many big houses may be in it. If that is a persistent poverty community, we need to target resources. So that's why I've been pushing at least 10% of these resources ought to be invested, targeted to these communities that are persistent poverty communities, because the children who are being born and growing up in those communities ought to have access to health care, online learning, and whatever it takes for them to be connected to the rest of the world. And so I would say that all of us ought to really sit down and take a look at the impact, the real impact of whatever the policy is that we may be pushing forward. That is something I think that the Federal Communications Commission ought to take a hard look at and decide whether or not this policy or this truism, in quotes, is real for everybody.
And that's something we've been working on with the FCC. We wholeheartedly agree with you that it's time to take a look at that and make sure that the broadband maps reflect the infrastructure that's there and where these gaps are. It's smart policy. That way then the providers know where investment's needed. The government knows where investment is needed.
Right.
The federal government, the state government, and the local government be able to look at a map that's accurate is just key to making sure the investment that they're willing to make is efficient and effective. We've, in fact, Congressman, I spent part of my Wednesday finishing up our comments for INCOMPAS to be submitted at the FCC exactly on this issue as they're implementing Congress's Broadband Data Act, which is all about making sure the maps are accurate.
Absolutely.
You know, they continue to talk to Congress about the additional funding that's needed for that mapping. And I know that's something else that you all are talking to Senate leadership about, is that broadband mapping funding that's needed so that the FCC can make the investment in the software and the information technology as they're obtaining that information directly from the providers. So thank you for that. And I hope that funding comes through, because the FCC, I understand, really needs it to take that next step. They're working on the rules and the requirements for the providers, but they are going to need that money to make sure that happens.
That's great. That's great. I think that's going to be so very, very important. That, to me, will do as much as anything to get this stuff on track, to get it to doing what it needs to get done. I remember very well when the late Senator Fritz Hollins was governor of South Carolina. South Carolina pioneered in two things that people don't think about a whole lot. Technical education was one of them, but educational TV was another. We did some things with educational television that no southern state was doing, and very few states were doing anywhere in the country. And in order to have that educational television network that we had towers all around South Carolina. And so when we started working with this broadband stuff, we took a look at those towers. We said, hey, let's look at where these towers are. And we started doing the mapping. And so I'm so proud of what is happening in South Carolina. We've got great maps for internet. We know exactly what to do and where to do it. And all we need now is for that work to be honored and responded to. And we can show this country the way to go here in South Carolina. We've got so much that we are trying to get beyond in South Carolina. This is one of the things that we're very, very proud of, and we want people to take a look at this and maybe help us show the country the way to go.
That's fantastic. Congressman, we really want to just thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
I want to give you a chance, any parting words for our competitive providers who are working so hard to keep all of their customers connected during COVID, continuing building out their networks, and any last thoughts that you may have for them, any message?
Yeah, well, let me close with this. I've been closing a lot of things and opening a lot of speeches with this. You know, I used to teach history. I studied every day. And I've been referencing Alexis de Tocqueville a whole lot recently. Tocqueville, the Frenchman who came to this country to study our penal system. But while here, de Tocqueville discovered what he thought was a certain magic about this country. And in his 2-volume work, Democracy in America, de Tocqueville wrote this thought: America is not great because it's more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because it has always been able to repair its faults. COVID-19 has revealed some real faults in our system, and we need to repair those faults. And I believe that one critical tool to repairing the fault line in healthcare delivery, in education, energy, in a vibrant economy is broadband. That, to me, will go a long way toward repairing that fault and sustaining it.
Well, we're going to do our part to help repair that fault. Thank you again, and we appreciate your leadership, your time today, and please let us know what we can do to be helpful so that the broadband agenda can move forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.